welcome everybody, and thank you. We're going to have a discussion today with three experts in the area on the use of artificial intelligence and HR. I'm really focusing today on conversational AI and generative AI and how it's changing the HR landscape and how that's affecting HR roles, and really thinking about how it's affecting our work and what we're doing moving forward. So today, I think the place we want to start is with a quick introduction. And if everyone could take a minute to introduce themselves and a quick description of, when we're talking about AI today, what is the perspective that you're coming from? How would you explain it to a client that you're working with? And if we could start with Phil, that would be great.
Yeah, great. Hi, Megan. So, yeah, I'm based in Manila in the Philippines. So I've been with Rising for 7 years now. Before that with IBM, and I came here first to Manila from the UK with Procter & Gamble. So I have a technical background, engineering and IT, but then I've been in the HR, IT space for about just over 20 years now, 25 years actually. And, through IBM and others, been involved in some of the early days of AI tools like Watson, et cetera, as those came through. And for me, I think now the exciting thing is, where those early tools were more focused on helping the HR team with some of their activities and getting insights and analytics and things. Now it's really being able to transform employee engagement, the employee experience through some of those large language model, the chat experience, conversational, and the new generative tools as well. With video and image, making richer content for learning, etc. So it's really now getting to the point where it can transform both candidate and employee experience, which I think is really exciting development.
Thanks. And Stephanie, can I get you to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Lichtenstein. I'm located in Tampa, Florida. I've been with Rising for 7 years, but within the SAP landscape for about 19. So I started out with SAP on-prem with OM and PA, and then moved into the talent suite, and then moved to the cloud in 2020. So I come from a more HR process, the implementation, the business side of the implementation when it comes to success factors. And for me, conversational AI and generative AI is really another tool, technology within our arsenal to kind of improve the burden that HR has sometimes around allowing them to do, automation, workflows, quicker access to data, allowing them to complete tasks faster, getting access to information, not just within HR, but across their organization, providing them with recommendations, really allowing them to gain, a better understanding of how to do things quicker and faster and easier.
Fantastic. And Martin, really excited to have you here today. I'm not going to spoil it, so I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
No, thank you very much for having me. So my name is Martin Redstone. I've been in the HR space for about 19 years now or so. Before that, very similar to Phil, actually, kind of engineer background, computer scientist, etc. But for the last 7 years, I've been deeply embedded in the world of conversational AI for HR and recruitment. I advise HR departments on their use of AI, conversational AI, and automation on a regular basis. Where I see the world right now, when we talk about AI, I've been saying for several years that the most intuitive way of engaging and communicating with anybody or anything around us is through natural language. And what I see now is a paradigm shift in how people are starting to use computing technology, whether it be personal computing, mobile computing, or enterprise computing, is that we're now seeing that paradigm shift away from using a mouse and a keyboard and a touchscreen through to using natural language to get what we want out of that system. So I think it's a really exciting time in the history of computing and the history of human-computer interaction. And I think that it's going to affect not only, as the other panelists have said, not only kind of the way that enterprises engage with their technology, but the way that employees and past, present, and future employees engage with technology as well.
That's awesome. So we're hearing a lot about changes in how we're interacting with technology, and how technology is changing the way people are interacting with their work. What is it that AI is actually doing in the role of HR? I've kind of heard already, we talked about it. We heard about it being in L&D, helping making better content. We've heard it about being in recruitment. We've heard about being in onboarding, helping us with things like automation. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AI is actually doing in the workplace? And I'm just going to go in reverse order now. So we're going to start with you, Martin, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So very much following on from what I was saying, I think that whilst the kind of underlying technology that we have in the workplace is very much stayed the same, kind of database-based technology and what have you, it's the fact that we're able to become more productive in how we use those technologies that AI is changing the way that we do things. So within the HR aspect, not only are we talking about some of the more tactical things such as L&D, onboarding, employee engagement, HR kind of service desk automation, those kind of things, but also the way that we can analyze data and make proactive decisions around quite strategic business decisions that need to be made. So I think that's kind of one of the key enablers that AI has been able to give us, is being able to make better proactive decisions faster. But also absolutely changing the face on how we solve kind of business challenges, especially within the HR space. That kind of hire to fire space is that, you know, there's so many opportunities to utilize AI to do things better, whether that be process things better, faster, reduce error rates in things like employee transfers and what have you, or even just making people's lives better and easier and making them want to turn up for work and be a happier place to work.
So we're hearing lots of improvements there. Stephanie, your take on it?
So, you know, I completely agree with where we're going with it. As far as, you know, how it's being used in HR today, you know, I look at the recruiting module and I see, you know, job descriptions being able to be quickly created and enhanced, where this was a time-consuming process. If anybody have ever written a job description, this would, you know, you'd have to go out and research and gather information from different sources and kind of put it together and then really Q&A it, where with AI it's, you see that that part of it is being done very quickly, right, and easily within the application. You don't have to leave, you know, success factors in order to bring all that information in, review it, and then make some decisions. So that the fact that it can quickly turn around things, the same thing with the kind of interview questions, right, generating those interview questions, you know, you can go out and Google that, but I think the difference now with AI is you're allowing us to be more specific about the information we're looking for, right? So it's not just generating interview questions generically, it's looking at the job description and then be very prescriptive about what kind of interview questions are you going to utilize. And again, this is all suggestions and recommendations. So the user's always in the seat to make the decision whether to take that content or not. And I think you know, taking the burden off of the HR group to really you know, again, try to bring all that information together. AI is really expediting that for us. So that's really great. And then for conversational AI, I mean, yeah, conversational AI, like Joule, being more of an assistant, right? Enhancing the experience by, you know, reducing the number of requests HR is getting about how do I do this? You know, I think about new managers coming in. We've always had self-service. We always had the ability to search for self-service, but now guiding them through that workflow. So when a manager goes in and says, you know, I need help doing something, it's not just guiding them to that task, it's walking through, here's the information you're going to need. Here's what I need for you to complete this task, and then be able to execute on it. So again, those are the two benefits and really you know, process changes that I see when it comes to these solutions.
That's awesome. So Phil, unless you have something really desperate to add on to that conversation, can I ask you a different question and challenge you a bit on this one?
Yeah, sure, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So we're hearing, and I know these things are absolutely true from Martin and Stephanie, that we're getting these assistants. That's helping with things like job descriptions. It's helping us work through workflows and processes. But it's one thing when a chatbot can help us with a process that we know to be true.
Yeah.
We know that to onboard a new employee or to approve time off in an SAP environment, we know that information is accurate. But if we're asking it to bring back something like a job description, and how do we know that that information is accurate? And I think the bigger question is we have a hiring manager that's come to us as an HR professional and said, I need a data scientist. I need a whatever. And you go, okay, great. And you put in data scientist. How do we know that that's actually the right skills? It may be the job title they think they want, but it may not be the actual skills they need. So kind of like these, it's one thing to ask it to help us with a simple process. How do we validate? How do we know that these more complex things that we're asking it to do are accurate?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to have with AI is curating the input and the content that it's feeding from, right? I mean, one of the interesting trends outside of HR just generally is ChatGPT and others being used as a search engine now rather than Google, right? People just ask a chat and it's trawling the internet and pulling back information. But as you said, that can be any information, and there can be bias built in there, the bias that exists out in the world and through people who put the content out there in the first place, and that would be replicated in the results and the output. You can get positive reinforcement loops. If it's generating content that isn't correct, that is now part of the input for the next cycle of things. So there's worries about things like model collapse and things in the future. But in an HR space, within a company, in a corporate environment, you have a better chance of curating that and putting guide rails around it and managing what it's feeding from. But then you have to do the work in the background to make sure that's up to date. And if things are out of date, that you're removing those, or putting values against which ones are the trusted, the correct input information, so that the service understands that. But I think if you can do that and get on top of it, then it's really a great solution for using that conversational AI as your front end to search information. So you don't need to know where to go, how to go through your SharePoint or whatever to find a particular policy document. You just ask a question and get the information back, and that can be your front end into the HR service. One of the major roles of the HR practitioner in the past, unfortunately, has been fielding questions and reminding people to do things and reminding people how to do things. And that almost goes away in this kind of world, right? Where you have a model that you can just talk to and ask questions like that, and it will provide you the right information, but also importantly provide you the link to the actual source document behind, so you can then go follow through and get that information. And you can also link it to things like regulatory updates. So the HR team can use that to get tax updates, etc., and just ask and search and get those updates as needed. So a lot of value in using that as your front end. I think there's a particularly good use case in onboarding, right? When you have new employees coming in as a buddy, right? Have a chat service where they just ask questions on how to put in their overtime or their expenses and things, and it's all available there, as a buddy. So one of the best use cases, but curating that information, putting guide rails around it, is going to be an important part of the role of managing an AI environment in the future.
So it's not something that we can just deploy and forget about and leave, and it's just magically going to work for us. There's still some effort that needs to go on.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, Martin, I know that you've deployed some of these systems in the past. What is some of the reality of bringing some conversational AI into HR? What are some of the efforts that are going into actually doing this?
Yeah, and actually on the back of what Phil was saying, the challenge with large language models and generative AI is that they're trained to not say no. So ultimately, if it doesn't know the answer, it'll make it up based on its training data. So that's something to bear in mind. And data is a key part. I mentioned it earlier in my opening, but when we're deploying these solutions into HR departments, data is the central aspect of all of this. Without good data, you don't have a good experience. So you need to make sure that your data is solid, and that could be, like Phil was saying, a SharePoint full of policies or FAQs or something like that, alongside your actual source of data, and making sure that your HRIS is up to date ultimately, and data fields are mapped and all those kind of lovely things. So there's lots to do there to lay the groundwork. But I did mention experience, and that's a super important thing as well. When you're building these solutions, you can't just plug your data into into a large language model and hope for the best. You need to also design that experience, whether it be the tone of voice that the conversational AI is conversing in, whether it be testing both happy paths and non-happy paths of experiences. You need to make sure that everything's sound. And actually, you can't test a conversational interaction until it actually goes live, because you have no idea how somebody's going to interact with that, and you can't plan for every eventuality. So data, experience, and testing, super important. But actually, based on something that Phil said earlier as well, and I think Stephanie as well, is making sure that that you're continuously reviewing, continuously monitoring, and also ensuring that things like your data are up to date, so you have a good data audit and data quality process in place. So if a policy is updated centrally, you make sure that's reflected on your information system as well.
So there's new roles being developed. Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, I wanted to ask about when they're deploying it, that's all from a systems perspective, but I think you also have to look at from a change management and training perspective, right? You need to talk to your employees about how does it work? When should you use it? When should you not use it? What you should be doing with it. So I think that's an important part as well, is really the, like any tool, like any, support mechanism, you're going to have to continue with that change management and training piece of it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There is a full-blown marketing plan in place when you're launching something like this to make sure everybody's brought along with it. It's you can't just fire and forget. You need to you need to bring people along on the journey with you. I totally agree.
Yeah, because this is, and I kind of have this in my notes here, and a question I wanted to ask. This is a great time for it. This, as Phil said, this is changing the front end. This is changing how we search, how we interact with data. This is, and Stephanie really pointed out, and you've also pointed out, Martin, it's changing this human-computer interaction, how we interact with our computers. We're no longer having to learn its language. We can use our own language to interact with with the computers. How are we teaching people how to do this? Is it because they're just simply learning to do it with ChatGPT on their own? Or is this something that we have to consciously be thinking about as we're deploying it, teaching people? And like you made such a great comment there, Martin, these products don't know how to say no. How do we teach people that? How do we teach them? And especially if you're using it, like it's one thing to be using it as a bit of a search engine, maybe helping us to get a job description or something that's very contained. Another thing when we're starting to do things with like people analytics with it, and we're asking it to retrieve data for us and to make an analysis. So how do we work with people to get them to understand this? Where do we start? Anybody want to start on that question?
I mean, I'll jump in.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So there's two thought processes here. The first one is going down the route of AI kind of enablement, and actually giving people the opportunity to learn how to have a conversation with the machine, because whilst there's still that piece around natural language, there's an art to having a conversation with the machine. That we may not have when we're having a conversation with a person, because we can infer as a human a lot from what somebody says, whereas sometimes you need to be as blunt as anything when it comes to conversing with the machine. The other thought process is taking away that option, and you notice with some of the things that Jules doing around just giving people kind of button options. And so button options, whilst they're thought of as kind of an old school way of building a chat interface, actually some of the times from a psychological perspective, giving people less options, and every time somebody taps something on a keyboard, that's an option they have to make. So removing those options away from people and giving people direction. When you're developing an experience, a conversational experience, there's something called the cooperative principle, which is ultimately a chat interface telling somebody how they use them in order to help them. So rather than saying, ask me anything, it's saying, hey, you can choose one of these three options to get you started. And so there's lots of thought process and methodology involved in designing the UX around the conversational interface. But yeah, there's two options there. There's designing the interface to make it easy, or enabling people to be able to have that conversation.
Interesting. And what was that principle called again?
The cooperative principle.
Cooperative.
Yeah.
And so it is that and I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that, where you've gone into a chatbot maybe with an airline and it says, I can help you with your booking, I can help you with a change of seats, I can help you with directions or information, something like that. So it's giving us a very strict guidelines of what it can do, versus another situation where we can train people and say, there's all these options, here are ways to start working with it. So like ChatGPT, at Rizing, they put on this incredible course and had somebody come in and show us how to work with ChatGPT. And even for me, I've been working with it. It was eye-opening. There were so many things I didn't know about working with something like ChatGPT. I didn't realize how much the reinforcement affected it. I didn't think, me, a drop in the ocean, it's not going to affect it. I didn't realize how much it was affecting the conversation, the quality of the conversation I was having with that chatbot. So as we go forward, where do you think is that better angle in the corporate world? Is it better to be teaching people this broader way of working with the technology, or do you think it's better to have, for the employee experience, to have these more contained environments?
I particularly think it depends on the situation, right? And the task that you're trying to complete. I think in some situations, you need to give them very strict options. Here's what I can do for you. And I think Joule is like that right now. Here are a set of, self-service that you can do. And kind of walk them through step by step of what they need to do once they've selected the task they want to complete. Where again, a broader ability to kind of get what you need or want is the job descriptions like that, right? You can pull a whole bunch of information in. It just you're very broad around that. So I think one of the things that I think Success Archers has done well is they've taken their time with deploying AI and really thinking about where it's going to be relative and not just sticking it everywhere, kind of just throwing it out there. That's the one thing. And then, looking at where within the HR process it makes sense to add AI and really is going to enhance that experience. And then when they do enhance it, it's really choosing the best option out there. So I think it's going to be a mix. It's not going to. There's no one good answer for every situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, one of the benefits here is that there's a very low threshold of entry into doing this, right? I mean, it's not a huge cost like implementing an ERP with a big change management exercise. You can start small and pick a few of those use cases, get going, get some feedback, build it into the company culture and grow and add more use case, add more model to it as it goes along. So it's a very easy thing to get started with. HR in particular is an area that has a lot of sensitivities about data and processes and things and opening all of that up, right? So, you have to help your HR organization as well as the company as a whole kind of get over some of that and manage through with that curation that we talked about earlier and making sure that the data is correct and up to date. So I think start small, pick a few good use cases that are going to really add value and improve the experience, and then grow from there.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about picking some of these small use cases and focusing on that experience, what are some examples that we can start thinking about as HR professionals? Where, like, if you were the CHRO of a new company that's starting to implement AI for the first time, how would you determine where to pick, or are there some areas that you would automatically say, hey, this is the area that you should always go for right away?
I think for me, it's.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead, Phil.
No, you go ahead, Stephanie. That's fine. Go ahead.
I think for me, it's really starting with the problem or the pain point, right? I think every company is going to be a little different based on, are they doing large recruiting? Is the recruiting, are they doing hundreds of hires? And so for me, that makes sense, right? Or is it, and they have a lot of people who are onboarding. So I might look at that area first. But if they're not doing a lot of hiring and it's not a huge problem, they might be looking at just enhancing the self-service piece of it. So are they a company where they have a lot of people out in the field and they're doing things on their mobile devices and things of that nature, where they might be wanting to update things very quickly? So for me, it really it should start with what problem are we solving, or where is your pain point when we're looking at trying to bring that in. Phil, I don't know if you had a different aspect of it.
No, not really. I mean, I think we've talked about a couple of them anyway that I would say are useful to start with, which is more that that employee kind of search option, finding information, providing, opening the door for the HR function to the rest of the organization, and providing an easy way to get access and get information for employees that are onboarding, but also just for everyone, right? To get updated policy information, process. I think that's a perfect use case to start with for me.
Starting with that that basic HR
Yeah.
FAQs and getting people started and keeping them up to date, and then that basic engagement piece with HR. Martin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Actually, I think that I have a principle of, you can't run before you can walk, and you can't walk before you can crawl. And so the first use cases, which tend to be kind of proof of concepts or pilots, should be low risk, low complexity, but great kind of low hanging fruit to prove that concept. And things like data retrieval, kind of, answering questions, etc., etc. Exactly that, because you're not affecting significant decisions like hiring decisions or those kind of things. You're not putting anybody at kind of regulatory risk. So being able to do something simple like that, which proves the kind of value of what you're trying to do, which is augment and automate, is super important. So I think that exact example that Phil mentioned around data retrieval, answering FAQs is a perfect place to start.
FAQs, yeah.
But I think, Megan, there are some great areas where you can get into, right? That are much more value add once you get through that initial threshold. So, where HR would typically be advising line managers on how to have performance discussions, how to have difficult discussions, you can coach and prepare using generative AI for those kind of employee discussions. So there's a lot of good use case like that. And then for the HR professionals themselves, they can be looking at how to take the next step on updating their HRIS system, things like that, stuff that they need to do to add value. The analytics, where is the risk for attrition within the organization, and what are the key metrics that we need to be focused on to prevent that and improve retention within the team? So how the HR team can add value to the organization, right? So there's a lot of areas you can go beyond that, but it's a great launch point to prove the concept.
Is that like so there's a lot more that we can do. Are we seeing the limits of AI yet? Are we seeing the containment of AI can help us get this far, but beyond that is not going to be applicable anymore? Is that still blue skies, is that still blue oceans as to where AI can really take us at this point in time? Martin, Stephanie, any thoughts? Phil, sorry.
Yeah, I think we're still at that blue sky point. I think that we're very much still in the early stages of AI when it comes to implementing it across the enterprise. And so I think what we'll see in the future is, very much an AI-driven organization where everything you do, but we're not there right now. And I don't think that we've even scratched the surface on what we're capable of doing once we augment our working with AI. I think that's the most important thing is, you can kind of go down the kind of sci-fi route of kind of unlocking the human brain, but that's kind of what we're doing. We're removing the mundane, the repetitive, dare I say, the robotic stuff from our roles, delegating that to AI to unlock being more human in our work. So the examples that Phil gave, what's better from an HR perspective, answering emails on a service desk or being released from that, so that you can have some really good coaching discussions with hiring managers on how to manage a really difficult situation and be that kind of human focused HR professional. And I don't think we've scratched the surface of that yet.
I like that, Martin. It's putting the H back in HR, right?
Exactly. And we hear it from vendors all the time. Yeah, that corny kind of, we want to kind of make HR more human, or we want to make hiring more human. And it sounds corny, but ultimately that's what you're trying to do.
Yep. You want to allow them to move up the value chain and add more of that relationship and culture piece into the organization. Yeah.
Exactly.
So one theme that I've heard discussed a couple of times, or not discussed, but more mentioned, and it would be great to get more into discussion with this, is how how this technology is affecting the role of HR. So we've heard the concept of that there's a lot of need around this new technology if we're implementing conversational AI to be monitoring it, updating it. Is that a new job? Is that a new title? Are there new jobs being created by the technology? Nobody?
I think
Any thoughts
so.
on-
I think responsibilities might shift. I think, you know, HR and IT are going to have to work closer together, right? And that may have, there may be an intermittent role, right, between the two. Somebody who knows HR very well, somebody who knows IT well. Um, Absolutely, I think so. You know, like I said, I think it's going to create opportunity for the experts to come in and really coach companies on how to do this well. Um, you know, and create a philosophy around it, because it's, again, it's not just to turn a switch and kind of walk away. You're going to have somebody who's going to, you know, again, talk to people about it, address questions, issues, you know, change management piece of it,
So yeah, so
ensuring yeah, sorry, go ahead.
we're seeing that we're going to need support in an HR IT function to help maintain the update and relevance of it. We're going to need we're getting the consultative role, helping organizations, strategic roles, putting the strategic direction in, change management, helping them get through it. Once we've done that, is it going to be like digital transformations, where we're just going to be continuously going through this process, and then once we get that technology in, we're going to go through that cycle again and again and again?
Well, I think that's always happened, right? I mean, the HR function, as with all functions, has always evolved, and it's usually technology driven, at least for the last few decades. I think that's just continuing to happen. There will be new roles. You know, there are prompt engineering roles in AI, things like that have just emerged over the last few years, and they'll be, you know, they'll be applied to HR, and there'll be other functions that come as things develop. But that's what we've always done with HR, right? So it continues on that path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Martin. Were you
No,
saying something?
well, I was just going to say, I think, yeah, very much kind of on both Phil and Stephanie's point. I think that, you know, we're going to be doing this in exactly the same way that we've done any other digital transformation in HR. And I just think that I don't think that HR should be looked at as a silo when it comes to, you know, AI transformation in an organization. And what I mean by that is very much what Stephanie was saying, where we need to lean more on IT, we need to lean more on product management, and we need to lean more on, certainly on operations and kind of legal as well, in this kind of environment. So I think that it's just going to create better interactions, better connections between the organization, because I think that whether it be HR focused AI transformation or whether it be across the board kind of enterprise transformation, HR is going to be central to that because it's going to affect people. And so I think that having those relationships internally with other departments is going to be super important to the success of any AI focused transformation. I'm not sure it's going to create new roles internally within HR per se, but I think it's going to create new responsibilities or new parts of the role. Like I said, if you remove stuff from somebody's role, you're going to have to fill up with something else. So kind of you know, AI agent management, those kind of things, going to be really important in the future. So you might have an HR AI agent that's doing X, Y, and Z, and so having somebody in HR that manages those AI agents is going to be a really important skill in the future.
So we can expect to see tasks and potentially roles evolve, but also leave HR. So some of the traditional roles of having large help centers helping with service desks that are doing shared services for multiple organizations. If we're able to replace that with a chatbot, we're going to see some definite changes. But the average organization that has their typical HR function, we're going to see more of a shift then, likely.
Another point on that, right? So, I mean, supporting the rest of the organization as they go through an HR growth and application will be important. There are now HRIS systems that allow you to hire virtual employees, AI employees. So that could be a shift, right? I mean, a company could be adding virtual employees, AI employees to their organization, and they will need to be registered in the HR system. So that's something that's already happening in a number of HRIS systems. And that's an interesting development to see how that that evolves. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
have any more details on that?
I think it was Matrix, the one that I saw. It was the HR system in the US that allows that. But yeah, it's a trend that's happening. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think it's a little while. That's more the newer kind of startup HR systems. It'll be a while before the likes of SAP add that into their offerings. But yeah, I think it'll come at some point.
Like,
Yeah.
is it like, if we had a robot, do we put it into our HR system, or do we
Right,
put it
because
into our enterprise asset management system?
maybe
Don't we have to do
both,
maintenance
right?
on them? Like, don't have that in our HRS system.
Maybe both. I mean, so we already have some bots that are doing development, right, work and consulting type work in the system.
Mhm.
So and they do a number of hours. You track the number of hours, and you have to pay for those hours. So you treat them almost as virtual employees in that case. So
yes.
that's something to think about in the future and how HR would support that.
Yeah, there was a fantastic example of a police force over here in the UK where they were employing RPA bots. They were going through a digitalization project where they were obviously police, historically loads and loads of paperwork, and they wanted to digitalize that. So they employed RPA workers, so RPA bots. But in order for those RPA workers, those robotic process automation workers, to access police systems, they needed a police identification number. So they had to be treated as an employee in order to get that identification number. And so, yeah, there's started to become some interesting use cases and some interesting precedents around employing digital workers ultimately. Really interesting time. Really interesting time. And I said this a while ago, which is that, if you think about, current kind of managers, they manage people, whereas not too distant future, managers that are taking their first steps into kind of management leadership roles might be managing a team of both people and digital workers. And so from an HR perspective, we also need to start planning towards that. Like you said, Megan, it's, tongue in cheek, but are they thought of as technology, or are they thought of as workers? And, and how do we manage that? It's actually a question we have to answer from an HR perspective.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Because I remember it was, you'll probably remember this, Martin, in the UK again, a couple of years ago, without naming names, but there's someone who was very vocal in suggesting that we needed to tax robots, like employment taxes.
Yeah.
And that's how we were going to pay for universal credit or something along those lines. Is that something that we're going to be doing? Are we going to be putting them on the payroll and paying employment taxes on our digital assistants, or is it just something where it's going to be these unique use cases as we integrate our systems and we make it through these problems, and understanding what the real role of these digital entities really are?
Yeah, and that's why I said there's a question that needs answering, because ultimately it is a piece of software, it's an asset. It's not a worker, but it's carrying out some of the tasks that a worker carries out, just like any software would do ultimately over the years. And there's a lot of grandstanding and a lot of fantasy going on around this, but the organization needs to answer that. But no, I don't think we should be subjecting robots to income tax, that's for sure.
The organization shouldn't be paying taxes on it to pay for everything. I don't know. It always feels like, I don't know. Sometimes you have to wonder where governments think money actually comes from. So we're seeing a lot of changes with this. We've been talking about a lot of changes. I know I've been working with AI in HR I was just registered actually for my 7th year of my PhD. All I can say is thank goodness I'm doing it part-time. Otherwise, I'd probably go into a deep depression at this moment, knowing I've been working on it that long. But one of the things, like we've kind of had this sense of, we've been going through these hype cycles, and we talk about them with Gartner hype cycles, where people are like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing, and then the trough of disillusionment, oh, it doesn't really work, and then we start seeing it actually work. And I know Gartner has been putting these different technologies and AI technologies in HR at different places on the hype cycle. More generally speaking, where do you think we are right now with using AI in HR? Kind of along the, let's use that hype cycle as theoretical framework so we can have this discussion. are we at that point where everybody's still just like, it can do all these amazing things, but we really haven't seen that reality? Or do you think we've hit that trough of disillusionment? Or do you think we're starting to implement it? We're actually doing this and we need to just keep going with the implementations. Stephanie, do you want to start us off on that thought?
Sure. I think people are at different stages. I think we are getting closer to more adoption. And again, I think that's due to just the strategy of not throwing it in everything, being very pointed, and giving users the option of where they want to implement it. I think Phil was saying, start small. You can do one or two things, and then kind of go back. So I think for me, I think we're at the point where it's more accessible. They're very great use cases for it, and I think companies are becoming more open to start using it. So I think we're kind of past that. It's all great, it's going to solve all our problems. It's not doing that. I think we're coming up the kind of that hill where we're saying it's more realistic, and they're definitely use cases that can be applicable, and that should be really looked at.
Yeah, so you're at the point. So if you had if you had a client working in an HR department and they came to you and said, our CHRO says nobody's adopting AI, it's not real, you would say to them, no, we're at the point, this is real, we need to be serious about it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not going away. It's definitely, something that is going to be, I mean, look at I was thinking the other day, I was like, spell check, right? I mean, nobody used spell check when it came out, and then all of a sudden now people can't live without it. I think AI is on that trend. It's something that you're like, oh, I don't need it, I'm not going to use it. It's just going to enhance and really, make things easier, faster, and allow you to produce, better outcomes. So absolutely.
Interesting. Martin, your thoughts. Do you think that that we're on that path, that we're going to know no different from AI in the near future here?
Yeah, I tend to agree with most of what Stephanie said, actually. I think we've seen a very, very rapid hype cycle on generative AI. I think it depends on the type of use case. I think it depends on whether it's consumer or enterprise. But ultimately, I think we haven't yet crossed that kind of chasm of productivity just yet, because we're still seeing new tooling being launched, and so we haven't seen the productivity gains from it just yet. But I think we're on the right path. I do think that AI, generative AI, and kind of tools like Joule are going to become ubiquitous in the workplace, as ubiquitous as the spreadsheet and the word processor. It's just going to be part and parcel of our standard kind of productivity kit that we come to work and are expected to use in a very, very short matter of time. And that's because the adoption is so easy, because I go back to my original statement, all you need to do is know how to have a natural language conversation with it. So, and we saw that with ChatGPT when it first came out. At the time, the fastest piece of technology that went to 100 million users. So yeah, I think that I think it's going to be absolutely ubiquitous in the workplace. We're already seeing, I think the recent Microsoft LinkedIn Work Trends report in May showed that 75% of knowledge workers were already using AI, whether it's their own or whether it's provided by the business. It's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I think it's here to stay, and I think we're getting closer and closer to, as Gartner calls it, the plateau of productivity. I think we're getting very close to it.
We're seeing the reality of AI coming into our workplaces. Phil, your thoughts on the reality of AI and where organizations are at with using it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different answers depending on which version of AI. I mean, we're on probably 3.0 or something now with the generative AI coming through, but some of those conversational AI and things are really well established in how you would use some of that. It will improve as generative AI builds on that and develops the language models. But then the generative AI, I think we're going through that hype cycle, and we're just trying to find more uses for it, right? I think we need to find what are the real the real applications that would bring a lot of benefit. We know of a few, but there will be much more that come up that we haven't even thought about in the coming months and years. So I think it's for the generative AI, where we're going through, we're a little bit lagged on that hype cycle, I would say, versus where we are in conversational AI and language models. So, but there'll be much more interesting ideas and thoughts on where we can apply that coming soon, I guess.
Yeah. No, this has been a really interesting conversation, and it's just reminding me of how this conversation around AI has changed. AI and HR has changed over the last quite a few years now, near a decade. Scary enough, how much we've all aged in this. And that we are getting to that point where it is really reality. It is happening. We are using it. And I think it's one of those things that we hear people, and I used to say this before, that only so many percentage of people are using it, but we forget that it is being used in our tech. It's already being used in the technology around us. It's already in Google. It's already in Google Maps. It's already being used by our banks, by our airlines. It is already existing in our world. It's just a matter of it trickling down and being more and more unique use cases rather than really big applications. And so we're definitely seeing it. And hearing this conversation is making me realize how much it really is there. And I think I think we've really brought out a really fascinating point around that front end use and that human computer interaction. And we're really seeing that change. I recently had an experience where I was actually working on my PhD, and I had a bit of a moment where I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so magical. I was able to work with ChatGPT, and I've always had that image of being like, a futuristic movie and somebody sitting there and having these great, grand, deep thoughts and being able to talk to a chatbot and say like, oh, who was the author of that paper? Or what was that theory again? And ask those little simple questions to be able to continue to have those great grand thoughts. And I was able to do not quite that, and my thoughts are not that grand, but I was able to I was thinking about some theories, and I was able to have a conversation with ChatGPT to answer some of my basic questions, which to me was a really magical moment, because instead of having to put it down, go into Google or go into the academic literature and figure it out, ChatGPT was able to say, hey, these are the important papers, these are the important authors, these are the important theories. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And I was able to go in from it that way. So it was such a magical moment for me where I said, wow, this future is really starting to be here. Things that I imagined when I was not even that much younger, 10, 15 years ago, are really becoming real. And I want to end on a final thought and get feedback from each of you, because there's been one thing that has been irking me to no end. We have a chatbot coming out from SAP called Joule. Several years ago, and I remember Martin and I we were at an event, at least, where this discussion was being had, if we are not discussing it. And this must have been I don't want to say it's more than 5 years ago, but sadly it probably was. And the great debate then was on the gender identity of chatbots. And I thought we had come to a conclusion on this. And I have to say, I'm a little bit hurt to see very feminized chatbots coming out. What is the current thinking about gendered digital assistants? And is there thinking, or have people kind of forgotten that debate? Since the pandemic, we've kind of forgotten about it, and we're just going down this development path. What are your thoughts on these gendered digital assistants and chatbots? Martin, you're kind of laughing there, and I know we had this discussion before, so I'm keen to hear from you.
Yeah, I was just going to say one name, which is Scarlett Johansson. But
yeah,
just the whole argument around that. But I think that actually OpenAI kind of have nailed it now, where I think the great thing about generative AI is that we can choose what we're more comfortable with hearing from and talking to. And I think OpenAI have nailed it. You can now select the voice that you want to interact with. And I think that's the key part of creating an experience, a personalized experience for people, is that I don't think it matters. I never think it matters. I don't think it matters at all. And I think I said to you at the time, I don't understand why there's such a big kind of conversation around it, because a chatbot is a thing. It's not a person. And the most important part, if you are going to give it a name and a gender, and I go back to my previous point around designing the experience, then make sure you're designing the experience for that name and that gender, and not just throwing it on there for the sake of marketing. So I think that there's 2 points there. I think the first is, nowadays with generative AI, you can give people a choice, and I think that's more important. But if you're not going to give people a choice, make sure you design to that name and to that gender.
Sounds interesting. Stephanie, your thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. So I was invited to go up to New York and test Joule out and demo it as part of a partner with SAP. And I started talking about it, and immediately I was like, and she can help you, and she can do this, and they, they gave me critique back, and they laughed because initially you just deferred her as a person. You made her, and I didn't even do it thinking, it wasn't a conscious thought. I just kept calling her she, Jewel, I think, to Martin's point, people are going to identify how they feel comfortable, and I could see in the future, you being able to change the voice, or, like I do with ways, if I decide one week I want it to sound like Beetlejuice, it sounds like Beetlejuice. If the next week I want it to sound like somebody else, I can. So I think, again, I think people are going to reflect based on their own experiences, what they feel comfortable with, and then giving them that option to make those choices as well. It's going to be very, very interesting, the kind of personalities that people are going to infer by not only the name, but how they interact with it. So
yeah, your thoughts, Phil?
it's going to be funny.
Yeah, I think I was going to agree with Martin that I don't think it really matters at the moment, and that choice is an interesting one. I mean, most of the interactions at the moment are still in text or within an app or within a solution, right? It's when it gets to voice, that's when that becomes something that's noticeable, and you need to make a choice on how to present that. I think one interesting option that I've done with Siri on Apple is you can record some phrases and it will generate your own voice as the Siri voice. So you talk to yourself, and it's interesting psychologically what that does, because it's like you're unlocking your inner intelligent. It's quite interesting how that works. So I talk to myself on Siri all the time. So that's an
Take
interesting
psychoses to a whole new level.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is like, because like I have a question again and again. Working with chat GPT, it has no voice at the moment unless you ask it to say something.
Yeah.
Does in your own head, we assign, a lot of us when we're reading things, assign voices. So we create a voice in our head. What does it sound like to you? Is it a male voice or is it a female voice? I think this is opening up a
robot voice, like a
robot voice. I think I think this is, hearing this discussion, and Martin, your point, just really, it really hit me. It isn't the gender of the chatbot. It's what we assign to it that matters. And I think this is just going to open up a whole new, really fascinating body of research, because we're going to be applying our own cultural bias to these products and how we interact with them, and a whole new area of social science to work with, and seeing what types of voices people choose for the different bots. Like, do they choose a male voice for more authoritative when they're, and for something like directions, they want a more feminine, softer voice yelling at them rather than a male voice. Who knows?
So
I think this has been
give me a call when you find out what that says about me, right? That I use my own voice. Let me know.
I think, as I said, a whole new level of psychoses. I'm definitely trying that, because I think you could do something really cool with that, and really freak people out too. Like literally take talking to yourself to a whole new level.
Absolutely.
Well, I always thought I gave myself great advice, and using that method, you could really, really up that game. So just a quick recap. Today has been an absolutely amazing discussion. We really had a really great discussion about what AI, so many words are trying to come out of my mouth all at the same time that it's not working at the moment. What conversational generative AI is doing to the transactional aspects of HR, so making those changes in recruitment, onboarding, etc. But the experience transformation, I think, was what really fascinated me, because we always hear about these transactional changes, that it's going to save us time, it's going to do automation, it's going to do all these things. But I think what people are forgetting about, and I really, really like that we highlighted in this conversation today, is that experience, the experience of how we do things, how we interact, that front end interaction, how we search for things. That human computer interaction is what's changing, and we really need to think about that, and really drawing out that conversation about how we talked. There it is. Not just about the experience, but that not just the experience. Oh, I've lost it again. That it created new, that in doing that, that's going to create new roles, bring in roles that we typically see in the transition period, and improve the relationship between HR and IT, which we're continuously seeing and we've continuously needed. And I have to say, with clients, working with clients over the last few years, where years ago it was almost impossible to get IT to show up to an HRS conversation, where now there's normally an HR IT representative always at the table there. That's a huge transition that we're seeing in that relationship change in the business. And we're only going to, and I think what we're hearing here is that we're only going to see it continue and change. And I think this is, a really important, but that there are pitfalls that we do have to be careful. But I think this is one of the most important ones, is that we have to have our data. Our HRSs need to be up to date. Our data needs to be there still. We need to have our data mapped. We can't skip those basic steps that I see in large organizations, especially ones that are changing and that have mergers, acquisitions going on. They're not mapping their data. They don't know what's what and where in their organizations it is. And so the larger the organization, the more challenging that tends to be. And those are the ones that are wanting to use the AI. And if you're going to be using it, you need that first. So I think that's interesting. What we're seeing with the digital transformation, what we've always said, those foundations around data and data mapping, still applicable with AI. AI might be able to help you more with it now, but you still need to do those activities. And then I think really fun, I really like that we ended on the conversation around gender and chatbots, and really bringing out, thinking about designing that experience and giving users the options to make the choices for themselves. And I am definitely going to be figuring out how to make my chatbot sound like myself, so I can do it on my phone and sound as absolutely crazy as I can in a small community. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Really appreciate time. Really appreciate the time, Phil and Stephanie and Martin. Really thank you again for joining us today. The insights from everyone have been incredible. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
To find out more, head to rising.com.